Right. Then I have the estimable pleasure this morning of uh, being the person who is going to ask Roger occasional question or two. So, so if you like to, I would like to start. And a lot of these, we have people who come along and give us life stories and things like that. And and I think that among us, we might know some of your life quite well, Roger, because you are quite a prominent person, prominent Quaker within Bristol. Therefore, I thought I would go along slightly other byways. And now I, as a Quaker, have been Quakering, I suppose, since the early 70s, which is more than 50 years within Quakers. And I'm sure, Roger, you have been there longer than me.
Just a bit.
Therefore, a bit. Therefore, I know that you have had quite a number of different posts and things in Quakers which you have been part of. Perhaps you can tell us a few things about these posts which you have had in the past.
Okay, right. Well, to answer the first point about having been a Quaker for a bit longer than you, I have two answers. One is since about 1654, um, and the other is since 1938.
Wow.
Um, so let's concentrate on the 1938 and don't wander off down the byways of 1654. Um, I started my clerking career as clerk of London and Middlesex Junior Quarterly Meeting when I was 16. And I think, was it 16 or perhaps 17? No, anyway, that sort of age. I think I probably did it for about 2 years. Um, no, at least 2 years, probably three. But then I became clerk of Junior Yearly Meeting um, in, when I was not quite 18 in 1956. That's before I left school. Um, so my clerking career goes back quite a long way. When we came back from Kenya in 1968, Reading Meeting were in trouble because the clerk Norman Chubb had a very serious back problem. So they were desperate for a new clerk, and they saw me coming. So I did 2 years as clerk of Reading Meeting. Don't know what happened quite next. Um, at some point, I got appointed to the agenda committee of the yearly meeting. I had served on one or two other things. I'd been on the Foreign Service Council Africa Committee, and earlier, I think before we went to Kenya, I was a member of the Committee on Christian Relationships, now CCIR, interfaith as well, but it wasn't in those days. But anyway, I got onto the agenda committee at the yearly meeting, and I served there for 3 years. And then they thought, well, why don't we make him a second assistant clerk? So I served as second assistant clerk, and well, I suppose under Roger Wilson, with who was of course also a member of Reading Meeting at that time, which was quite interesting. Um, and then and then after a gap, I became first assistant clerk, and that means clerk in the agenda committee. And in those days there was a very regular pattern of people moving up from second assistant to first assistant to clerk. But the person who served as second assistant when Jill Hopkins first became clerk. No, yes, I wasn't under Roger Wilson. I was under Jill Hopkins. Uh, the person who was going to serve, who was first assistant, uh, uh, it was decided whether by her or by the committee on clerks, which in those days appointed the clerks, nominated the clerks, um, uh, didn't go ahead to become clerk of the yearly meeting. So I served only 2 years as clerk of the agenda committee and first assistant clerk before becoming clerk of the yearly meeting. I served 4 years as clerk of the yearly meeting in the middle of the 1980s. Interesting time because it was the beginning of the new ecumenical movement. I had the privilege of attending church leaders conference at retreat at Canterbury, where all the bishops and the leaders of all the churches were there. And well, there are some stories about that, but I think I won't divert into that. Um, to, to do with my mode of transport. In those days, I used to commute to London. I was working as an inspector in the London Education Authority, and I commuted to London weekly on a large BMW motorbike. It was ideal for getting around schools, much better than the car in London. Um, so that more or less coincided. And I finished as clerk of yearly meeting in the residential at Exeter in 1986. After that, I was sort of fair game. I seemed to be grabbed for almost anything that was going. I really can't remember the order of events, but I was clerk of the Needs and Means Advisory Committee, which was a sort of budget committee for the yearly meeting, deciding on how money should be distributed between the different departments. It was quite an interesting job, and a rather odd relationship with finance committee. Fortunately, I had a most excellent uh, uh, assistant clerk in Jennifer Barraclough, who subsequently became director of Woodbrook. A wonderful person, really very, very capable. She would have been a much better clerk than me. I also served as on the Committee on Clerks, which has now disappeared and been absorbed into the General Central Nominations Committee. But its job was to nominate clerks for yearly meeting and the newly invented yearly meeting gathering, which happened in that period, the one at Loughborough. And there was an interesting setup there. The usual pattern of serving 3 years and then another 3 years, but no more, was varied slightly on the Committee on Clerks. I followed a wonderful man called Jeremy Greenwood, who was clerk, but they appointed the clerk from the second year, people who'd been on the committee already for 3 years, which meant that you actually served a third term. So I was actually 9 years on the Committee on Clerks and served as the clerk of the Committee on Clerks. Good thing I didn't have the surname of one of my predecessors. When there was a great discussion as to whether Jill Hopkins could serve as clerk of the yearly meeting and be on the staff of Quaker Social Responsibility in Education, it was referred to the Committee on Clerks to think about, and the report came back from Samuel C. Clark, Committee on Clerks. Anyway, that was. I then had a spell. They under the recording clerk, Donald Salvor, who was a good friend of mine from young friend days. He reorganized central committees, and there was a central committee called Resources for Service, and I took on that as clerk for 2 years. And I was in effect the employer for the Friends House staff. I had to decide on their salary and things like that, which was quite exciting. But in the meantime, I'd become a member of Meeting for Sufferings, representing Bristol area meeting. One day, the man called David Saunders, David Saunderson, sorry, not David Saunders, David Saunderson, who had been the head of my bedroom when I first went to Bootham. So I, a long way back. He was then clerk of the Central Nominations Committee, and he came up to me after a meeting uh, meeting of suffragists, said, I'm the clerk of the Central Nominations Committee, and we want you to be clerk. But I thought he meant the nominations committee, but no, it wasn't. It was the meeting for suffragists. So I became the first person, as far as I know, there maybe others back in history, who served both as clerk of the meeting and then as clerk of suffrage. I've now been joined by other people, particularly I think I'm not sure that anybody else besides Peter Eccles has done both. But there's a funny story about Peter Eccles and me because we've both been clerk of the meeting, we've both been clerk of sufferings, we've both been the treasurer of Friends World Committee for Consultation. And I think there's another thing that we discovered quite recently that a job that we shared. I think maybe it was Committee on Clerks, I can't remember. But anyway, we discovered that we served on four different things in different order. The other thing about my appointment as clerk of sufferings was that I think I was probably the first person to serve as in that capacity, whose father had been in that post. He was clerk in 1933, 34. No, 1934, 35, just a short time before he became General Secretary of the Service Council. So, but that was about the time that my two careers came together. I'd had a career in education, which you might want to explore a bit. I don't know, but let's set that one on one side. And I came to the end of that. I don't know if you know the Peter Principle. It's that you get promoted to the one job beyond your capacity, and that happened to me. So it didn't work out as chief advisor in the London Borough of Harrow. It was a bad choice for me to go there. Well, there we are. Anyway, I did 3 years there, and then was encouraged to take early retirement very early in my 50s. And so I went to the World Conference in 1991, Friends World Conference in Kenya. And at that meeting, I was interviewed for the post of Associate Secretary at WCC, and I served in that capacity for 5 years. Since then, I finished there at the end of 1996. In 2005, there'd been a change of General Secretary. The World Committee was in a very, very bad financial state, and they decided to appoint a Central Finance Committee. And I was asked to be clerk of the Finance Committee. Gillian Smith of the meeting was the treasurer, so we worked quite closely together. But the other members, of course, were scattered right across the world, and we used to have to have our telephone committee meetings at lunchtime in order to accommodate a friend from Washington State and a friend from Australia. Quite difficult. I think the friend from Washington State had to get up about 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Anyway, but after a while, Gillian, who was still working in her engineering job, renewable energy, and she decided that she couldn't carry on as treasurer. So I said, well, I'm willing to have a go at that. So I became treasurer of FWCC and served in that capacity from 2005 till 2012, including in 2005, Nancy Irving, the General Secretary, asked me to represent her at the second young Friends gathering. The first one had been in Lancaster in the summer, but there were a lot of people who couldn't go because of visa problems. And so they had a second one in Kenya, so it was easier to get that. And so I went in on Nancy's behalf, and that got me back into working in Kenya, which was lovely. And of course, as treasurer, treasurer, I spent quite a bit of time in Kenya sorting out some of their financial problems. Um, and over the years, I suppose I probably went to Kenya most years. Ending up with the World Conference at Kabarak, which I took a big part in the organisation. I am the treasurer of for the treasurer for the World Conference. Um, we found that the original search for somewhere to hold it wasn't going to work out. The accommodation wasn't adequate. So Jonathan Vogelborn, you in the meeting, and I travelled to Kenya and sought out another place, and that's how we ended up at Kabarak. And it served us very well. A bit more difficult being away from Nairobi because of transport, but no problem about organising lots of buses. And so it was a great success as a World Conference. Sadly, we were aiming to get 1,000 people. We only got 850, so it was a bit tight financially, but it was really good. A lot of people by that time didn't want to fly, and the cost was always a problem for some people. So quite a bit of the job was raising money to provide bursaries for people from poorer parts of the world to get there. But it was a very good occasion, and we're still benefiting from the outcomes of that conference. Then I think the last job I had for Quakers was trustee and clerk of trustees of Bristol area meeting. Oh, when I've been a funeral advisor, I found being a funeral advisor was really vocational. I really, really found it what I should be doing, as it were. And I sometimes took funerals for other people besides friends. I took my sister, who was a Quaker, but not in Bristol. I long time ago taken the Quaker funeral for my elder sister 21 years ago, when my younger sister died in the COVID. I took her funeral in limited. We only had, of course, about I think we had 19 people at the funeral. And I did my best man, non-Quaker funeral, which was a very moving occasion. So I really enjoyed that work. Haven't done anything lately.
Oh,
so now I'm sort of an elder statesman, as it were. Sit in my nice armchair in Reading meeting when I managed to get there. And, find myself ministering from time to time, which people seem to appreciate. So,
but
I haven't gone away yet.
But as I saw last yearly meeting I was at for said, and I saw you there, and you ministered a number of times, which
well,
which I saw.
I mean, it actually draws attention to something quite important about my involvement with Quaker organisation. I have become very interested in what's generally known now as governance, the way in which organisations are managed in sort of legal and charity terms, particularly charities, of course. I've been chairman, before that secretary of a number of charities, outside friends. I think I've taken two organisations from being either a charitable company or an unregistered, an unincorporated charity to charitable, what's it called? CIO, charitable incorporated organisation. One of them being Bristol Quakers. I've had some experience of that kind of thing. So the issues about the organisation of the yearly meeting are very close to my heart. And it was previous year, when issues of that kind were coming up, the recording club said, "I hope you're going to be there. We're going to need you." I managed to correct some misunderstandings about things that had happened in earlier times.
You you've mentioned um, meeting for sufferings, and this year, as you know, this year's yearly meeting, we're considering laying it down.
Indeed.
What are your views on that?
Well, it's a very good question. I've got very mixed feelings. Um, I mean, the question that had come up the previous year was the decisions around the closure, the change in the position of media for sufferings, uh, and well, let's go back to the yearly meeting at York when the recast proposals were being put forward. Um, I was very upset because the clerk of the Meeting Sufferings Committee spoke first before anybody else had had a chance to say anything. He said, "Oh, everything's all right. Why should we change it?" Um, Not a view I took. Meeting for Sufferings was in an impossible situation there because it had the deliberative function of receiving reports from committees and receiving minutes from area meetings and so on. An important part of its role, which I think was underdeveloped at that time. But of course, the problem was that it was also the trustees. Now, I've been on many trustees' body, but I've never been on one that was as big as 200, apart from Meeting for Sufferings. But Meeting for Sufferings had that responsibility in law, uh, because the definition of the trustees, whatever they're called, they can be called directors, they can be called a committee, a board, and in this case, Meeting for Sufferings. Um, the group of people who are responsible for the day-to-day management of the organisation, and Meeting for Sufferings carried that, and it made the agenda of Meeting for Sufferings absolutely impossible. So I had a very, very difficult time as clerk of sufferings. I had to be very, very. In Swahili, there's a lovely word, kali. It's hot, but I tended to be pretty tough. I even had somebody walk out on me once because I wouldn't let him discuss something that come up. Because we developed a system of if a minute came in a local meeting, rather than discuss it straight away, we refer it to the um, relevant committee, the relevant central committee for consider for checking whether how it related to other work and that sort of thing, report back to us. And that upset people quite badly. Because, oh, we want to discuss this. I had to be very, very firm about that. Just once or twice, we bypassed that because there was something that seemed particularly urgent, but not. It didn't happen very often. So sufferings was dysfunctional at that time. Now, so the result was that we quite rightly, not that year at York, but a subsequent yearly meeting, we set up the yearly meeting trustees, which I think I thought was absolutely essential, so that the suffering could be released to work to concentrate on its deliberative functions. Well, I gather that hasn't worked. The sufferings hasn't been able to shed its wish to run things, and that I think means that that's why now. I mean, there's been a sort of long running problem about the relationship between trustees and certainly the sufferings. And something had to be done about it. I'm not yet convinced that the proposal to lay down sufferings is the right one, but that's the way we're going. But I think that there are some bits of that which are going to need very careful working out. And one of those is the filtering of minutes from area meetings, because they need a relaxed discussion before they get any further. They need to be redirected, possibly into existing work or they may be something that has to come to your meeting. Now, I think there's a real danger that yearly meeting arrangements committee, which is now going agenda committee, which is now going to be very heavily loaded by the fact that yearly meeting is going to be held 4 times a year, are going to be given that task of filtering and discussion, and I don't think that's an appropriate body. I think that they need something a bit more more experienced and wider. For example, I mean, one thing that occurred to me was that the proposal is that there should be representatives, as there are to sufferings now, representatives to yearly meeting. And my thought is that the representatives might meet from time to time with the sole function of dealing with minutes from minutes from area meeting or similar minutes from recognised bodies, for example. But I don't know whether that is going to prevail.
I noticed that yearly meeting this year. There was quite a number of very angry people around. And
there was not quite a number of
there was quite a number of very angry friends around.
Oh Lord, indeed there were. But then, anytime you want to change something, people get cross. I'm not averse by any means to change. I think I'm still quite dubious about 4 times a year yearly meeting and what the status of the sort of additional 3 meetings are going to be. I think that I'm sort of reserving judgment on it.
I agree.
But I think we've got to be open to being able to adjust the way we do things in the light of experience. But I think that it's got a little bit too. I don't know. It's got a bit too rigid. But we'll see. We'll see.
Would you have the situation which a few friends have suggested, that as you're going to have the 4 kind of yearly meeting tranches, that they should be in other cities within Britain sometimes?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think the more we can get things happening outside London, the better. And I think that's something that is understood at Friends House. The local development people and the office in Leeds together make for an awareness of the need to become less London centric. But it seemed to me that the concept of the 4 yearly meetings had a very strong London centric assumptions about it, because of course for many of us, a meeting in London isn't non-residential. We have to go and stay in a hotel somewhere. Not quite the same as being on a university campus. I hope we can find some ways of continuing the university campus ones, because they're so important. But that's another matter.
Going away from that for a little while, you mentioned something earlier which I think might be interesting to some people, is that I think was it you and Hilda went to Kenya?
Yes, we taught in Kenya for 4 years. Well, I did. I taught. She did some.
Can you tell us something about that?
Right. Okay. Well, in the early 1960s, Roger and Marjorie Wilson, some people remember. Roger was Professor of Education and lived in what's now the Vice Chancellor's residence, Royal Fort House, up on the Royal Fort prominence in the middle of Bristol, and they used to sometimes entertain friends from around the area meeting. And on one occasion, we had the opportunity of hearing from Roger and Marjorie's son, um, whose name will come back to me in a moment. Anthony Wilson, the chap who set up the Quaker Memorial, the Conscientious Objector Memorial in the National Arboretum, which was quite a service. But anyway, he was at school with me, a bit older than me. And he'd just come back from Malawi, where he'd been working in community development. And so we had, it was a very interesting presentation, discussion afterwards. And in the sort of less formal situation afterwards, he said, "Well, why don't you go to Africa?" I said, "Oh, yes, that's an idea." So I wasn't entirely happy in my work at Withywood School, which was my first teaching job. It was a very strange head teacher. I'll go down that route. Um, and so I looked around, and at that point, a vacancy came up at a school called French School Camasinga, which my father had been involved in the establishment of, because although the yearly meeting was just one yearly meeting, East Africa yearly meeting in those days, was very much American Quaker orientated. Kenya, of course, was a colony, British colony, and followed the British curriculum. So when they wanted to establish a really well established boys' school, um, they decided that it should be um, run by British people, British Quakers. So French Service Council appointed the first head teacher, Alan Bradley, um, and it had become a very well established school. It was one of the three African schools which actually did A levels at that time. So it was quite a prominent school. It was well enough known that years later, when I was in Mombasa and got chatting with somebody in the street, who said I taught at Camasinga. Oh, Camasinga! So it was quite an interesting place. Very well established school, sixth form, and I taught there for 4 years. Um, which gave me my love of Kenya. It was a wonderful period. And two of my children were born there. Both my sons were born. We went with one child and came back with three after 2 year tours. But Richard and Margaret Wood went with one, came back with four. How they managed that in 2 year tours, I'm not quite sure, but they did. Uh, so, so, so anyway, that was a very interesting experience and very formative for both of us in our life. It was a really, really important experience, and I think its influence on the way I've seen the world and the way I've pursued my own development and in both work and interests has certainly been enormously influenced by it. Um, so that was Camasinga, and now it's one of the top schools in Kenya. It's one of the national schools. Mm. Interestingly enough, there are three national schools in Western Kenya, and they're all Quaker schools. Camasinga, Tawakali, and Lugulu. Lugulu is girls' school. Tawakali boys' school. So it's they've really done very well. They went through a very bad patch in between after the expatriates withdrew. It was quite difficult to get. Unfortunately, sadly, there was quite a lot of corruption, and it was quite difficult. But then we wanted to. The Camasinga managed to attract a very very good head teacher. And he was succeeded by another very good head teacher, but who then was wished off to be the ambassador in Canada. The result being that there was a wonderful Canadian donated computer room when I last visited Camasinga. I don't know about the one who succeeded there. I didn't like him as much. He was a bit. He was very, very, very friendly and welcoming, and as long as he thought you were going to bring some money.
Oh, that was a good idea. I was once working as you probably know, I was working with children and young people at yearly meeting for quite a few years. And
sorry, can I take this? May I take this phone call? Sorry about that.
Sorry? And there he was gone. Right. Well, that seems to be an interesting type of thing. And
Mm.
uh, I don't know whether he'd be back or not, but
I wonder if he perhaps needed a toilet break, maybe.
right, right.
Yeah, well,
There you go.
sorry about that. I'm in the process of selling my house, and that was with feedback from two
Wow.
visitors. The agent wanted to give me feedback on the viewers yesterday, and actually there's a viewing going on at the moment. so, so we may get somebody coming and looking into the room. Uh, so
Thing I
anyway, so
was just going to say was that uh, children, young people's
yeah, sure.
yearly meeting was that I once got the few young a group of young people I was working with, and I said, "Where do you see the future of Quakers? Draw me a picture of that."
Lovely.
And so one of them I looked at, and I thought, it's an interesting picture. The sky is purple and there's people sitting around in a circle. And I said, it's an interesting picture. Tell me about it. And with most young people sing, he looked at me quizzically as if, well, it's obvious, isn't it? And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, this is yearly meeting in Alpha Centauri.
In
Alpha Centauri. And I
mm,
thought that's absolutely wonderful
yeah,
show people.
yeah,
And what because we've a little time left,
yeah.
um, where do you see Quakers going?
Where do I see Quakers going? That's
Mm,
a very, very good question. I think we've got to get an understanding. Let me tell you a story. When I was clerk of the meeting, there was a big division in Quakers between universalists and Christocentric friends. And excuse me, hello. Yes, do carry on. You do come in here if you want to. I'm actually being interviewed. Yeah, yeah, no, you get the message to say, well, yeah, yeah, no, no, it's because I'm being interviewed. So, no, it's okay, it's fine. Yeah, no, just carry on. No, just come and have an interview. Sorry about that. I'll just break off. Yeah, yeah, no, I'll break off. Yeah, hello. No, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. I completely forgot that I've got this at the same time as inviting you to come see. Yeah, it's okay. No, no, it's fine. They're very understanding. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a fireplace in there. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think so. I've been here 55 years. I've brought up three children. Yeah. Oh, right. You are. Oh, right. So you're Nick. Well, you'll see his photograph downstairs. Sorry about that, friends. Sorry
carry on,
about
Roger.
that. But it was a clash of a diary clash. Um,
An
anyway, there
amusing
we are. So
story.
so so where were we? Oh yes. How I see the future. Anyway, through the very good offices of a wonderful man called Alistair Heron, he and I brought together people from the two, sort of leading names in the two traditions, and they actually came to quite a close understanding. Now, it seems to me that the division that's around now is between theist and non-theist friends, and I think that there is scope for that kind of dialogue, um, and we need to get a closer understanding. There was a very nice thing on Facebook quite recently. Stephen Petter, who some of you will remember, had quoted it from Central England's area meeting, stating the the, the, the central uh, nature of Quakerism. I can't remember the precise words, but the it was very much about sort of responding to the divine. And in the statement from Central England, it refers to God. My response on Facebook was to say, yes, I think that's absolutely the heart of the matter. Even I hope it is for those people who don't attach the word God to it. So I'm convinced that we're going to be able to find a lot of common ground, but we do need to talk about it. I think the meeting for learning at Redland is going to be addressing it later this month. For once, I might be able to get up early enough to get to that. Though I think it's a Sunday, it's going to be quite difficult because I'll have been away a few days before that, but we'll see. Because there are one or two very strongly non-theist friends in Redland, but I've never managed to make the space to have proper dialogue with them that I feel is absolutely essential. So I think that's going to be crucial in the future of Quakerism in this country. Quakerism in the rest of the world is a different matter. It's flourishing in those areas that are very much in the Christocentric, biblically orientated camp within the Quaker spectrum. In Africa, Indonesia, Philippines, to some extent in India and Nepal, in Latin America, and to some extent in the United States. So, but the succession of world plenaries and world conference has brought us together with them. And I think they are becoming more aware, at least the more sort of active and thoughtful members of those traditions are becoming much more aware of their Quaker roots. Now they express it in a way that's very unfamiliar to us, and particularly, of course, with program worship and with pastors. But the essential sense of the direct access to the divine, not depending on an external authority, is a bit difficult for them because, of course, they tend to see the Bible as a very strongly authoritative source. While I think we downplay too much, there are too many friends who are sort of alienated from the Bible and find it very difficult to relate to the Christian message. And I'm not surprised because the Christian message has been so fouled up by the history of the Christian church over 2,000 years. The early Quakers, of course, saw themselves as sort of the revival of the early church, experiencing the relationship with Jesus in a way that the people who actually knew him did. And what happened in between is well, shall we say, travels quite a long way. I mean, if you take the religious right in America and try and relate that to the messages of Jesus, I think we find it quite difficult.
Well, yes, I wouldn't. Quite
so. I mean, I think there's a lively future for Quakerism worldwide. I think I'm very encouraged by the spread of liberal Quakerism in Europe since the end of the Cold War, particularly in Eastern Europe. That's coming along very nicely. Groups in various places, but they're very, very small and they struggle. And if Britain isn't able to maintain its sort of resource and sort of leadership within that, I think that the future for liberal Quakerism in Europe is, shall we say, problematic. I'm very worried about. I know numbers aren't everything, but the continuing decline in numbers is a matter that we do need to take very seriously. So I think we've got to think very carefully about I mean, it's amazing how many people come to meeting come into a meeting and say, "Where have you been all my life? This is it. I've come home, but we didn't know about you." And we I mean, and it relates to some extent to the issue that's coming up in Bristol these days about the position of our meeting houses. I think we have an absolute obligation to make our meeting houses to justify meeting houses. We obviously need to make some money from them, but more important, we've got to see them as resources for expanding and spreading the treasure that we have in our understanding of the relationship between human beings and whatever it is whatever label we put to it, but I would call it the divine spirit. It's indefinable. It's some. I have a neighbour who at one time was training for the Catholic priesthood, but is now an absolute atheist. And he says, "But you can't prove religion." Well, you can't prove beauty either. Religion is something you experience, like beauty. It's not a. It's. But the trouble is, the Christian Church has always tended to see the position of God and Jesus and so on in very materialistic terms, in my view, and therefore opens it up to the question of whether you can prove it. Well, no, you can't. Of course, you can't prove it. But what you can do is experience it.
Well, I have been asking lots of things for you this morning. So I'd like in last little time to open this out and say, do other friends have any questions or comments for what Roger has said? Mary.
Roger, it's an amazing history to think you started clerking at age 15. So over those 71 years, is there any particular frustration that clerks have to endure?
When I became clerk of union meeting, when an issue was put before the meeting, you might get 30 people popping up, and you'd get people even sitting on the edge of their seat or on the arm of the seat to be able to jump up first and be the first person seen, which of course isn't how Quaker business meetings ought to go. And I struggled with that. It clearly wasn't satisfactory, but we had a wonderful arrangements committee, which included a very fine friend called Val Ferguson, who was subsequently General Secretary of the Friends World Committee, and stood down as General Secretary at the time when I became associate. And she said, you make a pause between contributions, but you're looking at the meeting. So they're wanting to catch your eye and be seen as the person to call. And you've got people sort of pointing to other people. That person's been standing for all this time and you haven't called them. Yes, I know. Anyway, she said, right, now when you have that break, that pause, don't look at the meeting. Keep your head down. And anybody who's standing when you put your head up doesn't get called. And I told the meeting that's what I was doing. And the next time, when I said the matter before the meeting, and I put my head up, 5 people stood up. So, I mean, I think it's an example of the issue of understanding the nature of our business meetings and abiding by the discipline of our business meetings, which is something that's even people like me who've grown up with them sometimes find difficult to abide by. I got myself into trouble at the York yearly meeting when we were discussing equal marriage. They started doing that, pointing to people, and I called out, "The clerk has eyes." And of course, other people started calling out, and there was a young friend spoke very, very movingly, and of course, I probably want to say that friend speaks my mind. It's a difficult one. It's quite useful to somebody. If one person says it, but a lot of people do. It's not at all a good thing for them. So there are issues there about the discipline thing, which I've lived with all my life, as it were. The only reason particular problem because it's so big. Many of the sufferings was a bit like that, but not too bad. Some of the sufferings were I was able to exert a fairly firm thumb in meeting the sufferings.
Other friends? Then may I make a thing about which I find enormously sad by is that I have met African friends and I've met other friends of other meetings of around that area. And one thing they don't, that they get quite het up by is that friends in England, yearly meeting, all that stuff, have recognized that gay friends are as much as part of their meeting as any other friend in there at all, and they find this really hard to understand, and that saddens me more than anything that they can take this view.
Sure. Yeah. I think yes. I mean, I agree with that, and it was a very big concern of mine when the yearly meeting got so upset by a particular virulence of Bristol from one of the Kenyan yearly meetings. I think friends didn't really understand that Kenyan meetings don't actually produce their epistles in the same way as we do. It's written by the clerk or the general secretary and sent off as. So and the result is that we don't now print the Bristles, which is in some way pretty sad. But yes, I mean, I think one needs to have there are one or two bits of perspective that I think need to be applied to that discomfort. One is that you go back 50 years in Britain and you'd have the same attitude. It wasn't really until towards a Quaker view of sex, and then in yearly meeting in 1978 at Lancaster, Jeremy Greenwood spoke about homosexuality, but it wasn't on the formal agenda. It was an informal meeting. We weren't yet ready to have that as an issue. So our acceptance, which I enormously welcome, of same-sex relationships is relative. Well, it's very recent indeed, and discomfort with homosexuality has been been quite widespread, really quite well into the towards the end of the last century. So we've moved the climate on these matters has moved extraordinarily quickly. First of all, among friends, and then in society generally. I think the fact that we now have have equal marriage and on the statute is a real tribute to David Cameron. I don't often say
that. Okay. Marianne.
I don't always say such nice things about him.
Yeah, I think I might have missed a trick. I didn't know if you were talking about the future of Quakerism and sort of saying that the evangelical groups were doing quite well, but obviously a bit worried about sort of say British Quakerism and European. I mean, is there sort of do you have your own little suggestion for what should be happening about that? Or
Well, I think we need to get a lot more dialogue between more conventional Christian friends and non-theists. As I remarked earlier, that there's going to be meetings for learning at Redland on that subject, which would be good.
you mean as a way for to ensure the future of Quakerism?
Well, I think that I mean it's something we need to resolve.
Yeah.
When the proposal to develop a new book of discipline came up at the meeting at Bath, I said I don't think we're ready, and that was the reason. I felt that we hadn't resolved the theist non-theist division, and I have a nasty feeling that the new book of discipline is going to lean much too heavily to the non-theist position, when we need both. We need to have a balance. I may be wrong about that, but I think if the book of discipline is too focused on the non-theist and excludes a lot of religious language, it's going to be very, very divisive. And that's why I think that it's becoming increasingly urgent that we have that debate, that dialogue, an exploration of our common ground. So that's one thing. The other is that we really need to think through how we're going to project our presence and our message. And we aren't very good at it yet. And we need to be using our meeting houses, for example, to be much more a place where people can find out about Quakerism. I wish we had a Quaker Centre in Bristol where people could drop in and ask questions. I think that's something that we could have, if we thought of it in good time, it would the right place for that would have been in Central Meeting.
One of the things that concerns me is the diminution of places where people can meet in person.
Yeah.
So Woodbrook closing.
Yeah.
As a place that you can meet. I've been a kind of quite a big blow. I've done 1 or 2 courses online. I mean, facilitated them. Feedback was okay, but I didn't enjoy doing them. And you kind of miss all that in between stuff. And ditto for the kind of cancellation of, as I understand it, of residential yearly meetings.
Yeah.
And
there's a real practical problem about that, and I can understand why that's going to be a difficult. I hope we can resuscitate it, but the amount of work that has to go into it and the difficulty of finding suitable venues is a real practical problem. But I agree with you, Charlie. I think the loss of a residential
and along with that, most of the sort of events for young people as well. I mean, or young if you're a
Sure.
teenage Quaker, there's not a lot you
Yeah.
can go to.
Well, I think the junior meeting and the conferences are still going, aren't they?
Well, junior yearly meeting has been rolled into yearly meeting now, so that's one less
Uh,
thing.
yes,
Um,
yeah.
and then there are one or two other things, but
That's how it used to be. Interestingly enough, when I was at junior yearly meeting, it took place at a friend's house at the same time as yearly meeting. But yes, indeed.
and then it's just increasingly difficult
But
for
but
people
the
to.
but the junior and senior conferences are still going in various parts of the country. I think.
Anyway,
I
that's
see.
my concerns that without those things,
Mm,
it's
yeah,
very difficult to get people to come in from the edge
sure.
or to grow into it as a young person. Most
Indeed.
you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway,
Um,
enough.
there are European events which some young friends might get involved in. My granddaughter in Berlin is really taken to the meeting camps that the German Union operates, and there are Europe and Middle East section youth gatherings, which I find very encouraging. But I don't know how many Brits go to.
And I mean, a lot of them are very expensive these
Well,
days.
of course, that's part of the
I mean,
problem. Life
gone,
is these days.
but I mean, gone are the
Mm.
days when it was thought okay to be sleeping on the meeting house floor.
Yeah,
You
quite.
know, I mean, what's wrong with that?
Well, quite
You
indeed.
know,
No, I think I don't think what Young French General Meeting still does that.
yes, they're adults. I don't think any under
Mm,
18s events
don't they?
take place like that. No,
Right.
they're all at specified youth centres
Right.
with
Yeah.
the costs accordingly. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and so
Right.
in order to go
Mm,
to it, you've either got to have well-off and keen parents, or you've
yeah.
got to be applying to a weekly committee
Yeah. Sure.
for your bus or train fare.
Yeah. Indeed. No, I agree with that, and I think the loss of Woodbrook is very, very sad. It's difficult to see how that could have been avoided.
Mm,
Um, we still have Charney Manor. We have Swarthmore Hall, and we have Glenthorne, all of which do some of the things
mm.
that Woodbrook did. Um, but they're up there. They're small and they're not so accessible.
Paul Parker, the uh, main man at Friend's house, said at yearly meeting this year that he thought the next residential meeting will be in 2027 when the new Book of Discipline is to be presented.
Mm. All right. Well, it was certainly good to do that as a residential. That would be really good. Um, I mean, I think that because of the cost of these things and the practical difficulties, uh, the Britain Yearly Meeting isn't the only organisation that is doing these things less often. For example, the FWCC used to have triennial meetings, and now they have to call it a World Plenary. Isn't that quite so often? And the last one was 6 years. So it's and for very good reason. Air travel, for example, is a serious issue for many friends, and so it's inevitable that these things are going. We have these things, but just for the there are all sorts of practical reasons, things get less frequent. But I think I agree with Marianne that the loss of face-to-face opportunities is pretty important, and I take a concern about young people.
Any any more comments, friends? Well, I think I would leave you with this comment, which I read somewhere, and I think it's very apposite of today, as with yourself, Roger. I think it can be said you have just a minute. I will go back a little bit on that and say I was at yearly meeting a little while ago, and there were two people in the main hall where you go in. And one woman looked at a chap and said, and I heard the last bit, "You mean you've lived here all your life?" And he smiled at her and said, "Not yet."
Yeah, indeed, that's right.
And I think that would say of you, Roger, which I think you have a well-lived life.
I've had a very interesting life. I've been given enormous opportunities, which I've enjoyed. I've had some struggles, but no, I feel reasonably fulfilled, and I don't know. I'm quite enjoying being, you know, a senior citizen in the society, particularly. Um, but it's the physical limitations can be very frustrating sometimes.
Comes to us all, I'm afraid, my friend.
I describe myself as a young man whose body keeps reminding him that it's old.
Well, of that, I think friends would now like to go and have their lunch.
Yes, indeed.
So I will say fairly well and tell you before you go, tell you who we're having next week. And I've lost a bit of paper which is set upon. So Patsy,
it's Gordon
Purdy, yeah.
And Gordon's talk is going to be called "The Brain is Wider Than the Sky."
Do you have any idea what that means?
Turn up next week and find out.
I think that's the only thing you have to come and find out.
Thank you, friends.
Let's see. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.